In this vlog, I'm going to be talking about Brexit and sort of what's gone on since the decision was made to leave the EU and if they're meeting their goals or not. Because there was a lot of things said that they promised and said would happen if they really did go ahead with Brexit. And so I'm here to discuss sort of what's happened and what was Brexit overall. The people who were arguing for Brexit was the UK Independent Party, and they were not backed by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister at the time was David Cameron. The UK wanted to regain border control and business rights that they'd been losing due to the EU's free trade border policies. Another thing that was hampering the UK, they felt, was the fees that they paid to be a part of the EU. And so they argued if they didn't have to pay the fees, they could use that money to help the UK instead of helping the EU as a whole. The Conservative Party and the Prime Minister were the people backing staying in the EU. They felt like they didn't need to break apart and be a part of just the United Kingdom and working towards that more independent country status that the Independent Party was fighting for. When it came down to it, the vote was 52%, 48% in favor of Brexit, and so they separated about 2 years ago by now, 2 years and a little bit. And so we can look at some of the things that have gone on since it happened, like the trade numbers. Granted, there was a pandemic in there, so the trade numbers were already going to be a little stifled because of that. But overall, it looked like from all the data that the UK was doing a lot worse off than the EU. Their trade between the UK and the EU was down 2% in 2021 from 2020. And when comparing UK to EU trade, there was a lack of trade instead of a huge bounce back in trade following the pandemic. It also appears that since Brexit, the United Kingdom has a less open and less global trade network than they did when they were in the EU, which is hurting their finances, and all of the money that they were bringing in when they were part of the EU is no longer coming in at the same rate, and it's coming in nearly 15-20% lower than it was when they were in the EU, which is obviously dangerously low in some cases because you need your big markets to help sustain being a more independent country than they were before. Another thing that I had read was that the more rural, less educated white male was the one who was voting for Brexit, and that the more educated, more likely diverse, younger person living in the bigger cities was the ones voting for staying in the European Union. You had a bunch of people who had been planning on voting since the turnout was 30 million people didn't end up voting if they were in favor of staying in the EU because the tabloids and newspapers had been saying that it was basically a done deal that they would remain in the EU regardless of what happened. And so there could have been a real lack of in favor votes for Brexit, which would have meant that they would have stayed in the EU instead of having Brexit go ahead. And now they're seeing the ramifications of that decision to not vote, and now the economy is struggling a little bit more than it had been before. There's also been a pandemic, so it's hard to really pinpoint where the lack of their economic growth is lying, if it's in the pandemic or if it's in truly being just on their own and instead of being in the EU. The UK's exports are also down as well, which is obviously a bad thing because if you are not making as much stuff and you're not getting as much stuff out there, you're going to be receiving significantly less money than what you were able to do before if you have a lack of products to put on the market to compete with others. So far, I would personally say leaving the EU has been not the best decision from the UK, obviously, with all the economic downturn they're having. Irrespective of there being a pandemic, most countries have rebounded, and they have shown that they have not really rebounded. Granted, this data was a year out of date when I was sourcing it, so it's not as easy to say that this was all the stuff that I had seen in the most recent time. It has been obviously harder for people who are trying to work in the UK to get work permits and all their paperwork sorted out. So that's making it harder for their economy maybe to bounce back if they can't bring enough qualified people in for jobs that they need filled, that they're not getting filled with their population right now. Just overall, when the Prime Minister decided to step down due to him not aligning with the decision and letting someone else take reign for him, it feels like if the country's going to be a bit more polarized by the decision, it will be very hard for the country to all buy into something that's been very difficult from the start, and a decision that was also very controversial, especially given how it was portrayed in the media and how it didn't seem like was really a possibility, and now it's the reality. I do think it would help if we had a bit more of a case study with a longer stretch of time from when Brexit happened to when we start taking actual close looks at everything that's gone on since the decision. I'd say maybe like 5-10 years instead of the 2-3 year amount we have right now. But overall, I do think it has been a poor decision from the UK to leave the EU, even if it was what the country somehow ended up voting for due to the media portrayal of the vote. I still think that we have seen another voting crisis in a large political system, which has led to some costly political and economic effects around the world, and particularly in their own country. So, those are just all my thoughts on what has happened in Brexit and what I have seen since I have been here.